Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you,
Alexis.
Phillips. I'm excited to join the Outside In team. My role here, in addition to writing Pulse and doing the Pulse Check podcast, is moderating the Outside In forum. And you'll see on your seats the first story that we've published as part of that forum. I've even got it here if you haven't seen. Polling insiders on what they think are the biggest cybersecurity challenges and the role that government can and should play. I do want to welcome our three panelists as I sit on this high chair. First, a man who needs no introduction, though I'm going to give him one anyway, Aneesh Chopra, co-founder and executive vice president of Hunch Analytics. He also spent years providing leadership on IT issues in the White House, and once upon a time worked at the advisory board company. And then Nick Dawson, executive director of Sibley Hospital's Innovation Hub, better known as the Innovation Czar. As long as I've known Nick, which is going on 10 years, he's been one of the most thoughtful thinkers on sharing healthcare information online. And last, and certainly not least, Niam Yaraghi, fellow with Brookings Institute's Center for Technology Innovation. He studied this issue very closely, and it's especially timely to have you, Niam, because you just did a report Thursday, last week, on cybersecurity and some of the biggest issues plaguing the sector. I have questions for the three of you, but I actually wanted to start by taking the temperature of the room. Simple question, show of hands. Is cybersecurity getting worse in healthcare? Show of hands. Okay, only about half the room. Is it getting better? Is cybersecurity safer than it was? I'm going to turn to you guys. Aneesh, is cybersecurity worse than it used to be?
So I'm going to answer this question with the typical caveat, which is yes, in the following context. We were in manila folders 5 years ago, 8 years ago. And so when you've increased the spread of digital records, by definition, you've created more of an attack vector on which there can be more risk. So relative to manila folders, I would say the cybersecurity risk is higher. But on the flip side of it, if you take a look at the preponderance of the data on where the cybersecurity risks have come from, the non-certified health IT systems are where the preponderance of the attacks seem to be. So if you kind of just take the practical nature of this, data in many databases that have been sold in the commercial sector, banking sector, healthcare sector, databases that people can log into and have access to, that someone who does convince me to click on a malicious link might expose. But the systems that are regulated, the certified systems that were subsidized under the Meaningful Use Program, for some reason have been less prevalent among the list of sites that have been. That doesn't mean that they're perfect and they're safe. It just, if you looked at the evidence, the overwhelming share of attacks have been in the uncertified system. So I'd say worse, but in context.
And let's come back to the certified point, but maybe move down the line. Nick, cybersecurity, you're at a provider organization. Have things gotten better or worse from your perspective?
Yeah, I was all prepared to take a very contrarian view, and I just want to point out when I got here, I was given a beer and shown this very comfortable chair in the back. And if I take that contrarian view and it means I can never come back, then I'm willing to adjust my point of view.
Well, how much alcohol have you had? Because we were hoping you'd actually go full throttle.
It's a bell curve. We'll see what happens here. I would actually probably echo those sentiments. I think, just by virtue of the fact that we've become digital very aggressively, very quickly, it increases a attack surface. I think there's also the pragmatic reality that threats have been there for networks for years and years and years, and this is a hot topic and a timely one for our industry for some really well-known examples.
Sure.
Things we just heard of. I don't know that necessarily means the sky is falling, per se. And then, I think from a provider organization standpoint, we're wrestling with a reality of, is this really the business we want to be in and know how to be in? Do we know how to staff for it? Do we know how to fight these kinds of things? We've kind of convinced ourselves that we have to be all things to all people. We have to be a food service delivery and an architecture firm and a leasing organization and a provider organization and a research organization, but this might be an area that we're significantly focused on, and so we think it's a hot pressing topic, but we might want to re-examine that.
So, Niam.
So I think I agree with the panel. The frequency of these cyber attacks are becoming lower, primarily because healthcare is becoming more mature in IT, just like any other industry. When you're younger, you're more likely to have accidents while driving. As you get used to it and you learn how to drive, the likelihood of accidents become less. So that is the case for healthcare as well.
So just to make sure that I'm pulling out that point, you think we actually might be trending in the right direction?
Yes.
As healthcare matures, things are getting safer.
Correct. And the other thing is that I think these recent ransomware attacks are the best thing that could ever happen for healthcare security, because they now let people know about the importance of cybersecurity in the medical domain. Cybersecurity and health IT is no longer an overhead for the hospital managers. It has now become an integral part of their services. Now they have realized that if they do not invest enough on cybersecurity and IT, it's going to hurt their main core operational businesses. So I think now that these recent ransomware attacks have created this awareness, healthcare providers would have much more business incentives to invest on cybersecurity and ensuring patient privacy, just like other businesses do.
So one of those ransomware attacks, we heard about it on the first panel. I think probably everyone in this room knows the MedStar attack, where hackers held hostage a 10-hospital system right up the corner from us, asking for bitcoins to release the information back, and hospital executives basically had to cancel patient visits. Nick, you were not at MedStar, but you are at a MedStar rival. So I'm curious, as an executive of a hospital watching this happen, what were the meetings like in the boardrooms at Sibley to make sure that you are not the next MedStar?
I don't know if it's a direct quote. I think there was probably a conversation that started with, "What's a Bitcoin?" And I think that's not throwing stones in my own house. I think that's probably a conversation that anybody would have, right? So my point there is the notion is really esoteric, right? The notion of being held crypto ransom, right? So there's a whole set of education we have to have, and I heard some of that in the first panel around what is this stuff, what is the real impact, what's a threat versus reality, and that's a case where there was actual reality, not just a threat. So the first part of it starts with unpacking what's really happening, what's our real risk, what's the mitigation of that risk, meaning like time to figure it out ourselves, to restore from backup if it's a possibility, to come up with a different solution versus the cost of just paying it. And sometimes that cost of paying it is cheaper than waiting to try to figure out another plan if there is another plan. So I think that's part of it. I think for us, and instead of pontificating on what happened in the boardroom, I have not been privy to that conversation, but I'll tell you what our team, the innovation team, starts to talk about is how do we think about this in a different way? So not in the sense that, although there was the suggestion we should start mining Bitcoin and have like a stockpile, but
Yet another business for hospitals to go into.
Yeah,
The architecture firm and the food service.
Yeah, we made our margin on Bitcoin this year. I think instead it's thinking, how do we not have a single point of failure? How do we not look at, and so our team got together and we said, well, what's going on here? And we said, well, it seems like the IT infrastructure and really the EMR, because it's increasingly become the piece that does the billing and the medication delivery and the admit and discharge and everything in between, is the operating system of the hospital. And how do we not have that become a single point of failure? So we started talking about different types of mitigations. And that was kind of where we took it.
And I feel like that plays right into what Aneesh was saying initially. Which systems are most vulnerable? Certified systems not. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, I'm not suggesting that one is particularly better than the other, but I would say the certified systems have at least embodied a lot more of the best practices into the regulatory framework. So there's actually a fairly basic understanding of how do you encrypt information at rest and in motion, and how do you ensure there's a user authentication process so that if Dan Diamond logs in, I know it's Dan Diamond, not a machine pretending to be Dan Diamond. So we've got a little bit more of these testing capabilities to make sure that the software sold to the organizations can meet a certain bar, and that bar gets better every cycle. Whereas the broader systems that are just available that you can buy anywhere really haven't gone through that level of review. So as a consumer protection matter, if you're the head of purchasing at Sibley or whomever, you may not know that this particular outsourced vendor that does your billing and collections, that gets the entire patient file to make sure that the copays are collected for the $20 that are missed, that entity has some cybersecurity best practices and hygiene to the standards that are seen among the certified technology pieces that are made available in the electronic health record program. So my perspective is we're getting better. It's an interesting point about healthcare. I'll make this observation about getting better. The whole framework for cybersecurity was we'd have a learning industry model. That is to say, there's more disclosure of breaches, which would then inform root cause analysis to say, now we know where the vulnerabilities are, let's close that loop in the next round, and that we'd have this much more transparent system, collaborative system. Healthcare is actually further ahead than the rest of the industry verticals because part of the HITECH Act was to create a framework that required that breach notification and that disclosure. So we're actually we're certainly saying, wow, a lot of attacks in healthcare. It's one of the few sectors that's required to report the breaches. Not every other sectors, So we're benefiting in many ways because we're bringing to life, we're shining light on these holes, and that leads to a loop where we get better and better over time. That's at least my perspective on how the systems evolve.
I like that learning system perspective. I want to go back to one quick point and get kind of nerdy about it for a second. I think what I'm hearing, and
This is a good crowd, by the way, to get nerdy.
Cool.
So, I give you the blessing.
This is a marginally informed comment. I want to preface it with that. But what I'm hearing is that the specific attack vectors are often unpatched Microsoft servers. So that's a well-known, huge vendor, right? That's not a small.
And I'm sorry, Nick. I probably know the least on this panel, so help me understand. Are we talking about Microsoft Office? Like what specifically in Microsoft?
So I'll get out of my depth really quickly too. But Microsoft has a whole server platform that a lot of the infrastructure sits on. It might be part of the application layer that runs part of the EMR. It could be part of the database layer, although increasingly those sit on a Unix platform. But that those Microsoft running servers, let's imagine, we've all got XP or Windows 10 on our desktop. There is an equivalent for big rack-mounted servers.
Right.
And that has to be kept up to date pretty regularly. So that underlying operating system is the thing that seems to have a lot of the vulnerability.
And I want to follow up with what Aneesh just said. We see many more attacks in healthcare only because healthcare is required to report them as opposed to other industries that are not required to report them. And it was designed like this in order to let the people learn about the failures. But what is happening is we only learn about the incidents and not the root causes of those incidents. So you see, you go to OCR's wall of shame, see so many attacks happen, but I haven't learned anything from that. I don't know if you have learned anything from the failure of MedStar. And I think to use the potential of that learning curve and industry informing itself, both OCR and also the healthcare organizations and other entities in the healthcare system, which is not limited to healthcare organizations and their EMRs. There are business associates and insurance companies who have many times have access to much larger volumes of patient data and are not using certified or uncertified EMRs to learn from these breaches, to learn the lessons that they learn from these breaches with each other. And unfortunately, it is not happening at the moment.
One thing I was struck by on that first panel, Congressman Hurd said that the hackers are learning from each other. These Russian hackers in some tower, they're sharing tactics and tips. The victims here in the United States, they don't have the same information sharing. How do we fix that?
Well, let me be precise about this. We do have a framework under NIST, the Commerce Department agency that is really the Switzerland for a lot of this information flow, to establish these industry verticals that are sharing. One of the big problems is, what are you sharing? So are you going to release personally identifiable information to share? Hey, I got this email from Dan Diamond, and man, that guy sent me some crazy things.
You keep using my name. Is someone sharing my information with you?
Right. And so I get the email from Dan. I'm like, hey, Dan, hey, Aneesh, I'd like you to prepare to the panel today. Click my link. And I click it. Now that was an infected piece of, that email contained a link that had installed some malicious software on my computer. How do I share that email with others without violating your privacy, in order to learn how did that particular piece of malware get onto your spoofed email? And so getting the privacy right has been the central debate in information sharing, which Congress now has moved forward on this framework for, the goal is to minimize PII while maximizing the sharing and learning across many industry verticals. So we're not perfect in healthcare, but we have at least a model to say, how do we ensure that these threat vectors are shared? Now, we are, in the first term for the Obama administration, we were at a cloud-first policy, in part because patching is a human failure, right? It's not Microsoft's fault you didn't patch. You got to push the button and patch. So the staff has got to, maybe they have some burden, but the premise is, part of the reason I was enamored with the idea of cloud is, in many ways, you auto-patch in bulk. So you get the threat vector at 3 p.m. on a Monday afternoon. You learned a new signature. You figured out it came from this domain with this apparatus. You sort of incorporate that into the feedback loops. The next time it shows up to an entity that's in the same cloud environment, you stop it before even it's presented to him to click. And so this learning, real-time learning, I think is the opportunity that's coming. And we're stuck in the must-have servers on premise, and but then you got to bury the responsibility. If you're going to do all that infrastructure, you got to do it all the way. And I think it might lead to a further acceleration to the cloud.
So just want to open this back up. Outside in is the hashtag. If you have questions, please submit them. They'll get passed to me. I want to build off something you just said, Aneesh, and Nick, it sounded like you were about to jump in, so hopefully this question will tee you up. We're at this balance of protecting information, but also the need to share. This was your point. How do we make sure we strike that balance in a world where we're going to benefit from sharing health data for outcome insight, for making it easier for patients, but someone on the first panel, I think it was Clinton, said the way to protect data is really just put it all in a server in a bathtub and never let anyone see it. So what is the right answer moving forward to strike the right balance?
I'm going to make sure I get the right question too. So between sharing and
opening it up, and locking it down.
Transportability, and so I think my answer to that is a little bit of a different tack, Dan. And I would say that back to what I maybe teed up at the beginning, we're going to have to invest even more than we've invested today. We've built this incredible infrastructure around IT security. We have, in fact, in any community that I know where the community hospital is the largest employer, it's also the most advanced IT shop. They tend to be an anchor for people who want careers in IT, and that's an amazing thing. And so we continue to build in that infrastructure. And I think, Aneesh, to your point about do we keep building that locally or do we start to look at cloud-based services or other things, I would say that we're at that pivotal juncture where we've got to decide, do we keep investing more and start looking for the places where we've left the door open and we've got to board it over, we've got to put a guard in front of that door, where we realize that we've left our backside totally uncovered and people are kind of flanking us that way. I think that's a question. I think the other way of looking at it is, do we take that same amount of money and resources and put it in building something completely different? And my version of this is maybe where I'm a little bit contrarian, and I started and went before this conversation to a bunch of patient groups and said, what's your view on this? What would you want? And almost universally, what I hear is, I want to own my own data. I want to decide who gets access to it. I have a Gmail account, and as far as I know, Google doesn't get hacked, but sometimes I sign up for a website and I say to that website, use Gmail or use Google as my username and password. So there's a mechanism for that. And I'm adding a couple layers of sophistication on top of some of the comments I heard. But my version of that is, if we want to start sharing things, instead of trying to patch what we've got or fix what we've got, what if we took that same amount of money and resources and built something entirely different? And that thing different would be putting the data back in the hands of the patients and letting them be the ones to share it, and having an authorization mechanism for doing that.
Because right now it's so hard for some patients, they might as well just hack the system if they want to get their data.
Anybody with a misspent youth could probably, get their medical records faster that way than...
We're not endorsing that. We're just offering that.
No, I kind of like that.
Especially because it's too easy to hack into these healthcare systems.
Well, your report touched on this, all of the different kinds of hackers that are out there, Niam, and some of them are malicious, and some of them are the misspent youth who are doing it on a dare or for fun. What are some of the commonalities around who is doing the hacking, and what can we learn from the patterns of hacking behavior?
Well, I interviewed 22 victims, and out of those 22, only 2 or 3 of them were real victims of hacking attacks. The rest were just goofy people who happened to, lose a laptop or a thumb drive or something like that. So I really don't think hacking happens as that much in the healthcare. It happens more than it should be, but not as much as we think it is happening, because I still cannot believe that the stories that I read in different news outlets claiming that medical data is worth $500 per record, because if that was true, and a community hospital has easily 1 million records, if I could hack into them and sell that data, $500 per record, it is $500 million. I will quit my job at Brookings right now and will go learn how to hack into these systems.
I'm sensing a theme in our panel. We're not endorsing this bad behavior,
Yes,
but point taken
but,
that it's a little overhyped potentially.
Yeah, so, but ransomware makes all the sense, because, and again, please pay attention that in these ransomware attacks, they're not touching your data. It's like somebody just changing the lock of your front door and doesn't let you get in.
Right.
They do not touch the things in your home. They're not stealing anything. They just tell you, hey, give us $15,000 or maybe $20,000 to let us get into your home. That's it. Because hackers themselves know that it's really difficult to monetize medical data. I mean, who cares about my blood test? Nobody. I mean, the only thing that they are after are my social security number and home address, date of birth, my personal information part of those health records, not the medical records. And they use that in order to create a fake identity or submit insurance claims and everything. And it is very difficult to scale that up. From a hacker's perspective, he may pay you $500 for one record, but he's not going to pay you $500 million for 1 million records, because
Niam,
it's very difficult for them to monetize.
Let me jump in. I see, Aneesh, you're nodding along. You agree with this assessment that it's not all about the medical information, it's about the social security numbers and...
Well, so here's the, it's hard to get in the mind because this is not well reported, but let's just take it. In 2010, the president said, I'm going to provide basically online access to patients in the VA to access their health records via Blue Button. Loads up the Blue Button, and 1 million veterans push the button and they access their data. Not a lot of widespread reports yet of people faking that they're a veteran in order to get another veteran's Blue Button file. Not yet. CMS follows suit. Maybe another 1 million people have downloaded their Blue Button file. Not a lot of evidence, or at least reported evidence, of people faking, okay? And on and on. Now, we then expanded the concept of buttons into different colors. Green button for energy, red button for, I thought it was red, and then we called it My Data for education. And then consumer financial data became the IRS Get Transcript. All of a sudden, the IRS Get Transcript, which now does have, in his point, the kind of the stuff you would reuse for economic gain, 23 million Americans downloaded their Get Transcript file. 200,000 plus have been publicly reported as having been spoofed hacker-like attempts. So it provides some evidence that the attack vector is for the data that has economic reuse and not so much the clinical values. And my perspective on that is a following hole in our current system. The average hospital or doctor does not know whether a machine is logging into the portal or a human. The internet economy has figured this thing out. There's a door for the machines and a door for the humans. And you have security that's commensurate with the request. If you want to get the machine door, the patient's got to authorize, the consumer's got to authorize it. So you got to do one more step than if a human just logs in. The great news about where we are in healthcare is that the Obama administration in November finalized the meaningful use rules for stage 3, which is now part of MACRA and all the other acronyms. So we've got a very clear view that there will now be a machine front door, a front door for machines, that will be secure and would allow for a more thoughtful way of registering, so no one has to hack the account in order to pull their health record into something that Nick is describing that could help them make better decisions in the care system, but rather a thoughtful front door that they don't have to hack in to get their own data. And really the race is on. Protect the old patching of the old servers and the painful headache while turning on the systems that we're going to need to be successful in a value-based healthcare world. And that's the opening up while locking down conundrum, which I think the opening up is going to win, and we're going to spend a lot more time doing that than this.
We have a few minutes left. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll try and get a microphone to you. I've got one question while the microphones are going around.
Up on the back.
Thank you. You do my job better
I'm
than
sorry,
me.
you're part of the brotherhood.
I don't have a good quippy response to that. So we just heard from Aneesh a potential solution from government on way forward. Nick, Niam, what is the government intervention, or maybe lack of intervention, that you'd like to see? Understanding that the government might not always be helpful when getting into this space.
I want to be thoughtful about that because so many of the thought leaders and the people I learn from are part of our government leaders. I think from a legislative standpoint, I would want to not act too quickly because I think my numbers could be wrong here, but I think very, very few people in Congress identify as coming from a math and science background, and this is pretty heavy in the math and science front. And
Congressman Hurd might disagree with you, but I think
well, I
think
it's a small percentage compared to. I look at Feinstein-Burr as a bill, and that's a bill to me that does not understand cryptography at all. It would effectively ban a web browser, and so I would not want to rush down that path and find ourselves hamstrung by something. But I want to go back and so this is just ad hoc and on the spot and build off of your idea of a learning network and your idea that we don't understand the root cause of these things. So I'm sitting here saying, I think it's Microsoft servers that are unpatched. I'd love to connect those two things, and I'd love to see the government build some way to help do that. That seems like a neat role for them to be able to play.
Lowercase g convener.
I like that.
You like that?
Yeah.
All right.
Did you copyright that?
That's the role. That's NIST. NIST is the lowercase g in government that convenes the industry to solve and learn in varying forms. And so it was my favorite industry for collaboration because it didn't have the heavy hand of regulation, nor was it free for all, don't do anything, but it had a thoughtful method by which we could actually orchestrate the right answer in a way that really is at the heart of what our government was founded on, this notion of community and commonwealth.
I think the best that government can do is convening and bringing people together and inciting them to talk with each other and work on a problem. But expecting government to help with innovation and information technology is really foolish. We have seen the results of government intervention in healthcare information technology through meaningful use program, and we have seen it through HIPAA regulation. It has been a miserable failure in both areas. So I think we should not expect government to be able or capable of, solving this information technology problem. It has not been successful. 155 million Americans have their records out there. There have been victims of privacy breaches, and that is the lowest estimate because OCR only reports the breaches of more than 500 people. Per each of those large breaches, there are hundreds of smaller breaches that are not even reported. So I can comfortably say that all of our records have been out there. We all have been a victim of privacy breaches. And if government couldn't help one of us protect our privacy, then I personally do not expect it to be able to do anything better. So let the market do its job. In my last report, I lay out how cyber insurance market could potentially solve all of these problems that we have in the patient privacy and cybersecurity, and how those market-based solutions could be a long-lasting approach to solve the problem fundamentally.
As you were talking, I noticed the first panel nodding their heads or shaking their heads no. Just so you know, you may have
no.
Yeah.
If you want, I'd love to defend
too.
the meaningful use program. We've done a great deal. Could you imagine, before you answer this thing, just a simple question, the average doctor who was caring for a couple thousand patients could not figure out which patients whose got background or condition that may have a heart attack or hypertension, which of them have elevated blood pressure levels so that they need to be managed in a more aggressive way. We, as a country, could save 1 million heart attacks now because of the method by which we've basically built up the program. every certified health IT system is capable of running that simple query. So Nick and his team can say, whoa, who are the 15 patients that we didn't know at risk of a heart attack? Let's go call them. Let's bring them in. Let's counsel them. Let's make it happen. So that's just a bitty little small thing. And I'll make one final comment. Cybersecurity insurance markets, you can't build an insurance market unless there's a standardized data model on which they can insure against. So you needed the government to help build standards to figure out what are the root causes of the problems on which then they could model the insurance policies to do it. So there is a yin to the yang. It's not entirely market alone, but I get the sentiment. I just want to correct the record where I can.
And a very provocative way to end the panel. If you disagree or agree with either one of our panelists, you can find them in the lobby. For all of the, unfortunately, no more time for questions, but for all of those of you who joined us in the room, thank you very much. Those watching on the live stream, thank you too. A final thank you to Philips for bringing this together. It should be a compelling series. And make sure to join us for cocktails. Please drink responsibly. Do not share your medical information. Thank you, everyone.